Hello and welcome. I'm your host, William Liu. You're listening to the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway. Today, I have three of the best media members covering the Raptors on to discuss 5 burning questions for the state of the Toronto Raptors rebuild. First, we have Keerthika Uthayakumar, statistician for the Toronto Raptors and Miami Heat broadcast crews. You might know her from her quote-unquote fun stats on the Raptors, which, by the way, get featured quite a bit on the official team channel. Or if you're really, really a fan, you know Keeks from her daily cinematic Lake Ontario photos. You know spring is back.
We're so back.
We are actually so back. We actually had our first, I think it was like 14 degrees yesterday, and it was like, it felt like summer, you know? What's going on,
16
Keeks?
degrees. It was beautiful. I went on a nice 2-hour walk. Didn't think about the Raptors for 2 hours. It was amazing.
This is what it takes to de-stress from the Raptors these days, is to take a 2-hour walk along Lake Ontario. Second, we have my former Pound the Rock podcast co-host, Joe Wolfond. He's one of the smartest and most uncompromising reporters covering the NBA. He's more likely to give Jake LaRavia a most improved defender vote than he is to give a hot take on the MVP debate. You know he's a real sicko because JJ Redick shared his work on dribble handoffs. What's going on, Joe Wolfond?
What an intro. Jake LaRavia, an honorable mention for the record in most improved defenders. So not an official vote. Let's just get that straight.
Okay.
If we're gonna be uncompromising, then let's not compromise.
He won't even compromise on a Jake LaRavia vote. That's crazy. Yeah. Well, you know, welcome to the show. And then third, we have my other Pound the Rock co-host member, the Derek Jeter of Score FC, the godfather to Alex Wong's consigliere, the Prince of Bamberg. It's Joseph Casciaro. Cash has returned to the Raptors beat in full force this season. I see you at every practice day, every game, kicking it back to his old Raptor blog days. And he's still finding time to cover the rest of the NBA. That's probably how Jamison Battle ended up on his annual All Nobodies team. Cash, what's going on, man?
What's going on? Talk about an intro. I'm loving this. I'll come on your show every week if I'm getting this intro.
Hey, you know, I did this mostly for Alex because, you know, Alex is your number one fan.
Yeah, that's actually, that intro is actually how Alex introduces me to every conversation we have. So it's pretty great being his friend.
It is pretty great being his friend. But for once, Alex is actually not here. He's just chilling in the background as always. And we are going to discuss the 5 biggest questions concerning the Raptors rebuild. We're going to start right now at number 1, probably the number 1 pressing question when you're watching this Raptors season. And my question to you guys is Scottie Barnes a number 1? Is he a number 2? Or is he something else? Keeks, let's start with you. This is the number 1 question concerning the Raptors right now. What is Scottie
Starting
Barnes?
with the controversial question off the top. I like it. I mean, I actually don't like it, but it's okay. I think if you're going to call him a number 1 or number 2, it's number 1 in team hierarchy. Like, he is on track to be, is right now, will be in 5 years, like the leader of the team role-wise, but he's not a number 1 or even number 2 scoring option, I don't think.
Okay. That is
Maybe
that because
3.
he's shooting 26% from 3 this season,
Or
44% from the field, true shooting is around 52, and the assist to turnovers, I actually didn't even realize this because I haven't really been tracking that much, but he's at 318 assists for the season and 157 turnovers, which has really been a struggle for him offensively. Yeah, okay. That's where you're standing on this. That's okay.
And unfortunately that's my stance here. I think even with lately they're tanking. I know he's only playing 30 minutes a game, but he should be averaging more than he is. I think it's like 18 points in the last little bit. 19.5 on the season, and like 17 points the last 10 games.
Right.
Which when you're playing who you're playing and you're playing who you're playing against, it should be a little bit higher, I think.
Okay, Wolfond, I'll throw this question to you. Scottie Barnes a number 1, number 2, or something else?
I would say something else, but I really like the way that Keeks framed it in terms of talking about team hierarchy versus how people would conceive of like number 1 or even like number 2 in an offense and what that means or what that connotes. Like, I think about Evan Mobley, right? Like his role with the Cavs, and I think you could make a pretty good case that he's been the best player on the Cavs this season overall. He's not their number one or number two option in terms of like how their offensive hierarchy works, but they have been able to like run a lot of stuff through him, run the DHO game from the elbows, use him a lot in the screen and roll as the rollman, even as the ball handler from time to time. He's able to use his face-up game. All those elements are super important within their offense. But you would describe him as like their number 3 scoring option, but he's also like probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year. I think on the whole, you could make a good case he's been their best player, right? So I think that has to be the path with Scottie, where like you could see him being the best overall player on a really good team. I don't think you want him to be a number 1 option in the sense that he is the guy who's asked to have the ball in his hands and be creating from a standstill. Like, I think Scottie really thrives in chaos, right? Like, he thrives when he has the ball on the move and when the defense is in motion. That's when his playmaking can really play up. I would love to see him in a situation where he can lean more into his play finishing skill set. He has unbelievable touch around the basket. But when he has to get himself to the basket over and over again, that's when you see the efficiency start to come down. You see him having to resort to shooting a lot of threes because defenses are loaded up against him. So, like with the Mobley comparison, Mobley's having a better offensive season than Scottie Barnes. I don't think that Mobley is a better offensive player than Scottie is, but he's playing with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, and that is allowing him to access all of these really efficient scoring opportunities, and Scottie hasn't been afforded that. So I think that's the way that I see it, where the best version of him is going to be one that is surrounded with other good creators and good initiators, and like his ability to play off of those guys, I think, is really going to be an amplifier. And then I think with what he's shown defensively this year, he could be the type of player who is fitting really well and amplifying an offense while anchoring a defense. And that is what I hope for with him.
Cash, we'll let you get your word in here.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much echo what Keeks and Wolfond are saying. I've been saying it all year that I think Scottie Barnes can be the best overall player on a contender one day, but I don't ever see him being the number 1 option, the number 1 scoring option. I think, look, the point guard stuff, the point forward stuff can be fun. It could also be chaotic, but I think his ideal role on a great team on the offensive end is a playmaking forward who's not initiating the offense. And I think there's still, a lot of production to be found in that role, especially if they find, the proper amount, the requisite number of movers and shooters and initiators around him. And then to Wolfond's point on the defense, yeah, like a playmaking forward. And I know, like, we were talking a little off air here, the Draymond Green joke came up, but obviously not the exact type of player. I think Scottie's offensive role and his offensive ceiling is much higher than what Draymond's is. But if you consider that role in the sense of playmaking forward with a little more offensive pop, but to Wolfond's point, that can anchor a defense, because what we've seen from him this year on the defensive end, and when you consider his physicality, his size, his length, all that stuff, his energy, that is the kind of guy that can be an absolute defensive monster, defensive superstar. And if you couple those two things, yeah, like that can still be a 1A type player on a contender. Now it's just about kind of filling the pieces around him, checking the boxes you need to check in terms of his supporting cast to build the type of team where that guy can be the best overall player, even if he's not the number 1 option on a contender. And that, to me, speaks to the fact that, look, like most franchise players in this league are still flawed, right? Like, there are very few guys that even come close to flawless, and those are like the perennial MVP candidates. And Scottie could have a great career. That guy could have a Hall of Fame career and never truly be an MVP candidate, and that's okay. Most franchise players have certain holes and flaws that their teams need to figure out how to build, the right teams around them within a certain context. There are very few guys who you can say, okay, this guy just gives us a crazy head start and it's almost foolproof. Scottie's not in that camp, but he can be in the next tier of guys where, yeah, he's a star, he's the best player in a contender, but some of his limitations, particularly in the half court on offense, mean you just have to find the right guys to surround him with.
So I think what we're all kind of speaking about is like the role right now that he's played this season has seemed a little bit bigger than, what he's capable of, at least at the moment, right? Maybe there's some sort of like big jump happening with his ability to score and create for himself. But at the same time, at least just based on this season, I don't think you can look at the offensive results and say that, being the 1A, for example, has been like particularly successful in this role. I guess my question to you is like, why have we spent this whole season and the last basically 2 seasons like really forcing this upon him? Because at the start of it, wasn't Scottie somebody who did play off of other players? And of course, like, we don't have to get into why it didn't work out with Fred and Pascal and OG and the old core. Trust me, it's a conversation that we've had many different times. But, why have we like pigeonholed him into this like role right now where like he's got to be the number one, he's got to be the play initiator, he's got to bring the ball up, he's got to be the point guard, he's got to shoot a lot of threes, because it doesn't seem to have played into the strengths of his game that we've identified here.
I was going to say, well, I think part of it is, this is kind of what rebuilding teams do, especially when you kind of, look around this locker room. No offense to these other guys, but if not Scottie, then who, right? Especially with, Emmanuel Quickley being out for so much of the year, given what their goals have been this year, whether you call it tanking or, player development, whatever. I think it's a combination of both, but I think you just look around and there's not really anyone on this team that you'd say, okay, this is who we're going to give the ball to and go develop your shot creation, offensive initiation, whatever, especially with Quickley out of the lineup. And so I think it's fine that they've tried to pigeonhole Scottie in that this year because one, I think it can't hurt his development to experiment in that role, get some reps in that role, especially when, and I will get to this later, but especially when like he's probably the only one you are 100% sold on as definitely being a foundational piece. I'm fine with that experimentation, even if the results have been ugly or they're not what people want to see from Barnes. It's, by their own admission, year one of a rebuild, whether we agree with that or not. They continue to call this year one of a rebuild. Let your franchise guy experiment.
Yeah, what's the downside of pushing him to find out how much he can do, right? And building those muscles and getting those reps in so that, even if or when you do bring in a guy who's more capable of being that lead creator, like you still have those reps in the bank, right? Like those are still going to come in handy when, you have to create something out of nothing to salvage a broken possession in the half court, or you're staggering minutes and Scottie is on the floor without that theoretical lead creator and you're asking him to do a little bit more with the ball in his hands like that. Those reps are always going to be valuable, even if he isn't playing the role that he's playing right now. And to Cash's point, like this is the time to get those reps in, to experiment, to push him and see what he's capable of. Like there's really no downside because, the goal right now is purely development. And if we're being honest, losing games. So like if ever there was a time to get that experience in and also to get the data, right? To just figure out what he is and isn't capable of, like this is the time to do that.
I'm going to echo everything you guys just said. They knew this was, I don't want to say lost season, but the only goal from this year was to develop all these guys. And the only way to do that is to get him the reps. And just to kind of, I guess another goal is just to give all the counters, develop the counters he'll need later, next year, when they're actually putting him in the role to succeed.
See, I agree with all that. Like, I agree that this season should be dedicated to development. It's been stated that from the beginning. My thinking is also, though, like, if you want him to ultimately to be in a role where he's the play finisher, then I guess the opportunity cost is that we have not really exercised that skill very much.
I don't know that is a skill that needs to be exercised in the same way that the self-creation and playmaking stuff is being exercised now.
Okay.
Like, I think Scottie showed in his rookie season that he can play that role extremely well. And maybe there will be some kind of adjustment period if he winds up, let's say it's Dylan Harper who comes in and is suddenly like the lead ball handler, right? Maybe there's an adjustment period there. With Ingram, there's going to be an adjustment period in terms of sharing the ball and like figuring out how they function together on different sides of the court. But I think that stuff can be smoothed out a lot more easily than suddenly needing to develop a guy's skill set that you haven't worked on in the years when you had an opportunity to do so. So I just think if you're comparing those two things, like I think we have seen from Scottie what he can do in that kind of secondary or tertiary offensive role as a dunker spot scavenger, as a play finisher. Like all those skills are there, and I'm not super worried about him being able to access them when the time comes.
Yeah, fair enough. My last question on the Scottie front, and I know we're spending more time on this than the other questions because, quite frankly, it's the biggest one. But how does this change the direction of the Raptors' rebuild if he's not number one as maybe originally envisioned, but more number two?
I don't really think it changes it much at all. Like I said, I don't. Other than like the absolute biggest optimist, which I guess the Raptors front office could be and arguably should be. I don't know, and I guess other than Darko Rajakovic, who will tell you Scottie Barnes is going to be the face of the league, I don't know how many people really saw Scottie as, like I said, one of those like perennial MVP candidates where you just get him. Like he's not Victor Wembanyama, he's not a Luka Doncic, he's not what SGA's become, where it's just like, oh, you have that guy, everything else will just take care of itself if we build this smartly, and like that's all that we need to do. Everything takes care of itself. Scottie's not that tier of guy, and again, that's not a knock on him. He can be, I really think he can be in that next tier where he's like perennial all-NBA type player, best player on a perennial contender. Like he can be that guy. And so I don't really think anything has changed other than maybe them considering how they have to construct things around them. But yeah, I don't know. I just can't see any point in these first 4 years where someone in the Raptors front office would have looked at the body of work and thought he was going to be like superstar shot creator, shot maker type of player. And if they did think that, then to me, that's just like a bit of a scouting mistake. I don't think they thought that is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think
all right.
everything they've done so far, all the moves they've made thus far, have been with the idea and knowing that he's not going to be that number one offensive guy.
Okay, so we're going to move on to question number 2 then, concerning the rebuild, because I think that this probably addresses a bit of that question. Number 2 is, how does Brandon Ingram fit into the future version of this team? So we know that Brandon, I mean, he's got he's still rehabbing that ankle, guys. The ankle it's on its way. They're
really
putting
hurt,
up.
Okay.
They're flexing that ankle. You know what I mean? Every time the media is in the practice gym, they got him out there to do some warm-ups, very, very lightly, very gingerly. But obviously next season we'll see Brandon Ingram, and he's obviously a huge piece to this team. The Raptors have obviously re-signed him and extended him to a 3-year, $120 million contract. What is Brandon Ingram's role with this team once we actually free him from the longest ankle injury of all time?
I thought, sorry, Wolfond, I thought you were starting to talk, or Keith was taking that.
Go for it.
I was just going to say that I think his role is filling, and I don't think this should be, I don't think he should be the guy to solve this, but as currently constructed, his role will be being the, shot creator and tough shot maker that this team has often lacked, especially in crunch time, in the times when they were trying to win games. If there's one thing Brandon Ingram can do with his, offensive abilities, his talent, and his length, is create for himself in pretty much any situation and get his shot off over just about any defender. And yes, sometimes that can lead to inefficiency based on where on the court he takes a lot of those shots, but that is a very crucial skill for offensive stars to have, obviously, and it's a very crucial skill that every contender needs because you need at least one guy who can do that, and for too long, the Raptors have not had it. So, I mean, that's the easiest answer, that he would immediately fill a role they desperately need, especially in crunch time, which is of a legit shot creator and tough shot maker.
Yeah, pull-up mid-range shooting, right? Like, where's the pull-up mid-range shooting on this team? It's pretty much non-existent. So it'll be nice to have a guy who can do that. I think, you can make a case that he comes in as, like, their best pick-and-roll operator. And I think, ultimately, I really want to see him expand his off-ball skill set and off-ball utility. That is, I think there's a lot riding on that, on Darko being able to coax that out of him in the way that we've seen him do with RJ Barrett. Am I overly optimistic about that after watching, other coaches try and fail to coax that out of him in New Orleans when it was imperative to do so, having him playing next to Zion? Maybe not overly optimistic. Does Darko have the secret sauce? Does he have some magic touch that allows him to do this when other coaches have failed? I don't know. That's super important, but ultimately you're going to see him operating with the ball in his hands a lot. And I don't think, if you're trying to meaningfully contend, you don't want Brandon Ingram to be your primary ball handler. But if you want to establish a baseline of competence offensively, then that's a big improvement. The Raptors don't have that baseline of competence offensively, and I think he's going to give them that. So that's, for now in the short term, it's a way to kind of move Scottie off the ball a little bit more, hopefully help him lean more into that play finishing skill set. And like Cash said, take on the burden of those, that tough shot making, that end of clock shot making, crunch time shot making, the ability to create for himself and get that shot off over any defender. That's going to be really important for a team that just has lacked those ingredients for the last couple of years.
I think the first thing I put in my notes when I saw this question was the ability to put the ball in the hoop, because they don't. Well, they're 26th in offense this year, obviously with all the lineups, but they can't seem to score points, and obviously the defense has improved, but they've been missing a pure scorer like Ingram for a while now. I think with Darko's offense and how he's creating great looks across the board, it'll work out for Ingram, especially if he decides he wants to take threes. I think he was taking 6.5 last year, or this year, before, and 3.8 last year, so.
Yeah. I think what you guys are all highlighting is that, you guys want to see how he fits into the system that Darko's running, which does require a lot of players to play off ball, right? Very rarely do you see the Raptors ever just roll the ball out to one guy and clear out and only play pick and roll all game. That almost never happens, right? And so, like we said with Scottie, a lot of the off-ball skills are going to be really important. We know Brandon Ingram can shoot. He can definitely shoot the three really well. At the same time, though, he's never really been a high-volume three-point shooter for an extended period of time, so that's something that probably could improve on that front. So I guess I do agree with you guys in the sense that, he's pretty involved, probably 1A, 1B offensively for you. Ideally, you want him more on ball towards the end of the game because, as you guys mentioned, we've seen the Raptors choke away many, many times this season when it comes to, their offense in crunch time. At the same time, aside from shot making, is there another weakness that Brandon Ingram addresses on this team, or is that primarily the reason that we brought him in?
Yeah, I think that's got to be the main reason. I think if they were bringing him in for any other reason than his shot making, then that's a problem. Because I don't think he is, elite enough in any other area where that would be a reason you bring him in and give him an average of $40 million for the next 3 years. The one thing I'll say with Ingram, and I think a couple things that have generally gone under the radar since they picked him up and people have talked about him, is he really did improve as a playmaker over the last few years. I think, I can't remember if it's the last 3 or 4 years, he's averaged 5 to 6 assists per game. The playmaking is there. Obviously people know he can shoot. Wolfond, I think, made a good point with the RJ stuff where it's if you look at, and I know Wolfond was talking about the off-ball stuff, but even if you look at how much more of a willing catch-and-shoot guy RJ's become in Toronto versus New York, I think that has to be a big hope with Ingram as well, right? The quicker decision-making, be more of a catch-and-shoot guy, because he can be deadly in that space from three. But the playmaking, that shooting, and the length, I guess, he's not at all a consistent defender, but the tools are there, the length are there, and if, he just adds to the general size of the team on the defensive end, that can't hurt. But again, the be-all and end-all here with Brandon Ingram is that shot creation and shot-making ability, and I really don't think there's another skill that they specifically targeted him for.
And in terms of, the shooting stuff and talking about three-point volume and being a willing catch-and-shoot player, that is going to be so important in terms of what he can actually do for the team's spacing. Because if he's going to be the guy that he's been, where it's not super high volume and also it's not a particularly quick trigger, where the ball is finding him and instead of letting those catch and shoot threes fly, he's kind of taking his time to like catch and hold and probe and, sometimes kill advantages and decide then to go to work in that mid-range in isolation, that's not really going to improve the team's spacing. He is a good enough shooter to do that, to create more space, but he has to actually be willing to take those shots, to not let those advantages die. And I think that is, in terms of his off-ball stuff, like the cutting would be great if we can see more of that. He has the size to be like a really good finisher off of cuts. But I think more than anything, it's just that willingness to let those threes fly off of the catch.
I will have to say that, like, especially for what New Orleans has been playing with recently, like one of the big issues is they just haven't had a point guard. And so they've had to play make through CJ McCollum, who's obviously a shooting guard. They've had to play make through Brandon Ingram, who's, a forward. They've had to play make through Zion Williamson. So
it'll be a seamless transition then.
You know what? It could be. Yeah, multiple playmakers and stuff like that. But I do believe that, like, it won't be that difficult for the Raptors to slot him in to a role where he's not, like, dominating the ball. I don't worry as much about that. But again, like you mentioned, it's about the success of him playing off the ball. Keeks, I guess I want to ask you, like, why do you think the reaction to the trade was, like, especially not in Toronto, but even a little bit in Toronto as well? Let's be honest. We were all in the media room. We were all a little confused when we saw the rumors leading up to it. But why do you think the reaction was, like, so tepid? At least especially, like, outside the Toronto market, let's say.
I think knowing what he was asking for and how much money the extension would be. At the beginning in the rumors, I think the thought was it would be RJ in the deal as well, which would have made it not as worth it. Plus, acquiring a Brandon Ingram when you're saying you're rebuilding and you're developing obviously changes the timeline immediately. Right now they're on track, or they at least want to compete next year, be in a playoff spot or a play-in spot next year. The quick change, I think, threw a lot of people off. It did for me, at least.
Yeah. Okay. Is it
I
just
have
that?
some fun facts, though.
Okay, let's hear them.
Some fun facts on BI. Just to go back to the fit really quickly. So one of 6 players to average 25 and 5 in the last 4 seasons. Can you name the other 5?
25 and 5? I mean, LeBron, Luka,
Jokic.
Giannis. There's one more.
Jokic.
LaMelo. Somehow. It's
LaMelo.
But,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
All right.
But that's like the
Good for LaMelo.
playmaking has improved. He's shooting 40% on catch and shoot threes this year. Up until he got hurt.
Yeah.
He wasn't willing to take those threes last year in New Orleans. And I think that's another reason why everybody was kind of confused about the trade. What he's looked like in New Orleans the last couple of years, especially with his, I guess, beef with Alvin Gentry. It wasn't very promising.
Right.
Now it.
Alvin Gentry was semi-retired in New Orleans. Not that I'm jumping to Brandon Ingram's defense. I actually like talking to Alvin Gentry.
Even Willie
I think
Green
a lot of people
now,
will tell you that guy wasn't the most committed to that job. One thing with Ingram too that I feel like we haven't talked about is he can get to the line. Like, he'll draw fouls, and I know it may seem like we're grasping at straws a little here, but like these are all important things in trying to construct like a consistent offense. Whether it's being able to get good shots, whether it's being able to make tough shots in a pinch and create for yourself, but being able to get to the free throw line where a guy's also a good free throw shooter is obviously just like a good, dependable thing to be able to fall back on. And, coach talk, like coaches will always tell you that having an offensive player that can get to the free throw line also helps you defensively because it means that you'll have like a set defense going back the other way. So I do think there are, a lot of ways that Brandon Ingram can help this team on the offensive end. But, Will, to your question there about like why it was met so tepidly, I think just because it didn't really jive with everything the Raptors had been saying all year, right? Like, again, I think everyone can understand the logic of just accumulating as much talent as possible and figuring out the rest later, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially when the acquisition cost wasn't that high. And okay, yeah, the $40 million a year isn't what anyone on Brandon Ingram isn't what anyone envisioned for the Raptors in what would be year 2 of their rebuild. But I also don't think it's like extremely egregious. I don't think it's long enough to make him untradeable. It's just that it didn't jive with what they were talking about. Like, they were the ones stressing to us, hey, this is year 1 of a rebuild. Like, we don't know how long it's going to take. We don't want it to take long like all these other teams, but we're also going to do this right. And it was supposed to be like the first time in the Masai Ujiri era where the Raptors publicly committed to a rebuild and were going to do things like with a slow and steady approach. And they were the ones echoing that, not us. And then to all of a sudden at the deadline, turn around and trade for a pending free agent who was going to be seeking 40-ish plus million a year, who didn't necessarily fit the timeline, who didn't exactly fit into what this team was missing, I think just created a lot of confusion, and fairly so.
I think also it was like a little bit of a misinterpretation of what actually happened, because a lot of the like line of thought that I saw was in terms of the negativity was like, and I'll admit, like I had a kind of negative knee-jerk reaction to the deal as well until I had time to think about it more. But I think what I saw was like, you know, the Raptors have talked about rebuilding. They can't even commit to a direction for more than a few months, and they're already trying to short circuit that rebuild. And it's just like the sticker shock of both like the player, the contract, and a team that was not very good buying at the deadline rather than selling made it seem like something that it wasn't. Where to me, it was like, I think they were out there looking, trying to see what they could get for Bruce Brown, you know, for like whatever they could get for their vets. I think they were going to try to get. And I think it was like, I don't think they were like, you know what, we're done with all this rebuild shit. Like, let's go and buy and get better. I think it was like there was nothing really out there of consequence for Bruce Brown. And then suddenly this opportunity came along to use that chip as a buying opportunity, as a buy low opportunity, frankly, to like send him and Kelly Olynyk, like a negative value asset, out the door with like a low to medium upside first rounder to get a player who, you know, was an all-star a couple years ago and has a chance to really raise the floor of this team at the very least next season when they're trying to be competitive again. I just think from that perspective, it made a lot more sense than people were giving it credit for. When just looking at, in a vacuum, oh, this team that's not very good decided to buy at the deadline rather than sell. And then I think the other sort of stigma that's attached to all of this and this team in general is that they're very expensive, and right now they stink. Like, they're an expensive team that's not good. And next year they're going to be flirting with the luxury tax, and, you know, even a high-end outcome for them next year is like, you know, probably in the 40s in terms of their wins, right? So I think that is part of it, and I just don't really care about that. Like, I don't think that is super important. I mean, if ownership is just like willing to pay the luxury tax next season, and it would probably only be for next season because the cap's going to go up, they're going to have to make some like roster moves in order to sort out the hierarchy anyway, like, then that would be great. But I think there are ways that they could duck the tax if they wanted to also, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It's like, what else were they really spending that money on? You know, like, yeah. I think I saw, I didn't listen to this, but a friend just told me basically that like Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo did their worst contracts in the league draft a couple weeks ago. And that Ingram, IQ, and Scottie were all on, like Scottie, which like that makes no sense to me. The guy's like 24 and one of like at worst the top 40 players in the NBA. So that's just preposterous. But like even with those other two guys who you could argue are like moderately overpaid, I just don't like what does it matter? Like, they're all young. Ingram's on a short-term deal, and what were the Raptors going to spend that money on otherwise? So that's the part of it that I think it gets a lot of flack that I just don't actually think is that important right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've made this point many times on the show that, like, cap space is not nearly as valuable to the Raptors as it is to, let's say, the Lakers or Miami or New York, right? We don't use that money to sign free agents. The one time we had cap space of consequence in the Bobby and Masai era, they signed Damari Carroll, right? So it's like, that is not a strategy that we use. The Raptors are a draft, and they are a trade organization. I do agree with the fact that you pointed out that, like, the Bruce Brown contract was kind of burning a hole in their pocket. It was like, you got to do something with it. You know, you picked up the option. First off, you traded for Pascal, or you traded Pascal to Indiana. You brought back Bruce Brown. Basically, it was all future value, right? The OG trade with New York, which I think New York dictated that trade. You know, I think there's certain trades where you dictated. There's other trades where the other team that you're trading for kind of dictates it. I feel like New York was dictating the terms. They were like, we're going to give you IQ because that's who you want. We're going to make you take RJ's contract. And here's a future second round pick. We actually intend to trade 5 picks for Mikal Bridges. But I feel like New York was driving that conversation. The Indiana trade was obviously future value, right? But at the same time, they needed to do something with Bruce. And I agree with you. There was not actually value out there. It wasn't like you're going to trade Bruce out there for a future first round pick. People knew that number one, it was Bruce Brown. Number two, like a lot of teams didn't have that amount of money to sort of like, I guess bring in a guy who's making 22. And so this trade opportunity, I think, was definitely the best option for the Raptors to use. And I don't actually think the Raptors will actually even hit the luxury tax next year either. So as long as they stay underneath that, I think it's completely fine. Yeah, I'm actually just really looking forward to Ingram playing on the team. I think, if we take a step back and think about like who are the best Raptors who can get a bucket in franchise history. And I know this is not like the biggest like analytical way to go about it, but besides Kyle Lowry, Chris Bosh, DeMar DeRozan, Vince Carter, I'll put Pascal in there. Like, is there any Raptor all time that's guaranteed to get you and Kawhi obviously. So that's 6. Is there any other player that is more guaranteed to get you their own bucket than Brandon Ingram in franchise history?
Did you mention T-Mac?
Toronto T-Mac was not as much of a bucket as Brandon Ingram right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Ingram would be the next guy in that list for sure.
So what are we talking about? We just gave up Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk. It's just a matter of fit. But again, that's more pressure.
It's also a pretty sad history of bucket getters, though, for being honest.
Hey, man. I was going to say, who's next on the list, man? Jose Calderon? Trev VanVleet?
Sonny Weems.
Hey, Young Guns era was a problem, man. Shouts to Sonny Weems, by the way. Still hooping out in Guangdong, China. All right, let's move on to question number 3. Are you sold on RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley as long-term fits for the Toronto Raptors? Keeks, let's start with you. What do you make of IQ and RJ's long-term fits here? And also, what is that role for them if they are here long-term?
I think RJ's role specifically changes with the BI trade. Not fully sold on how they'll fit together if they're both in the starting lineup. Maybe RJ comes off the bench. Maybe he gets traded. I don't fully know where that lands. But RJ's growth from New York to here alone, the off-ball movement, the three-point shooting, the consistency has been enough for me to be convinced he can stay on the team and would fit.
Is that as a starter? Does it really matter if he's a starter or a sixth man, by the way?
I don't think it matters if he's a starter.
Okay.
I think he can come off the bench and be as efficient, especially with all the reps he's getting in Darko's rotation as the bench guy.
Yeah.
He went a lot of RJ and bench units when everybody was hurt and when they're not. So I think that's kind of giving him the reps for a step over next year.
I also feel like it's noteworthy that I think last year when RJ was brought here, one of the things that Darko said was like he made RJ watch a lot of Manu Ginobili tape.
Lefty off the bench.
Which is another hint towards they probably want to play him off the bench.
Yeah.
My question with that, and again, we'll get to the IQ portion too, but my question with that is just, do you think RJ wants to be the sixth man?
I mean, I'll answer that and say I don't think any player who's scoring as much as RJ does and was as high a draft pick is it like, and professional athletes lack a certain type of self-awareness because they have to lack that to get to where they need to get to. But no, the simple answer is no, I don't think he wants that in so much as anyone in his current role and of his stature would want that. But I think if they can ever convince him that that is the best thing both for the team and for his career, which I genuinely believe is the case, then hopefully he'll take to it because I do think he is best suited to be a super sub, sixth man, great scorer off the bench. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And that doesn't have to mean that he logs the 6th most minutes on the team. We've seen plenty of great bench players, bench scorers. You mentioned Manu Ginobili. Not that I think RJ is going to be that caliber of player, but still, we've seen plenty of great bench players be closers and be consistent closers and rank in the top 3 or 4 in minutes on a team, even though they're not starting with the starting lineup. And I think that could be a good role for RJ going forward. And I also think that if he does accept that role going forward, I also think that makes it a lot easier to have him in the future plans, because I just think if you have to shoehorn him in as a starter, with Ingram there, obviously with Scottie there, see what happens in the draft this year. I just think there's a bit of a logjam there where it gets tougher to shoehorn him in as a starter. Whereas if you have him and if you consider him and view him as this great bench scorer, I think it's easier to see him in those plans. And in terms of the question that started this segment with like whether I'm sold on RJ and Emmanuel quickly, the short answer is no, but that's more so because, and it's something I wrote about earlier this year leading up to the deadline, when a team is rebuilding, and the Raptors are as early in the rebuild as they are, even with the Ingram trade notwithstanding, the best advice I could give fans is to not get attached to anyone outside of, in this case, like a Scottie Barnes, who is very much, the franchise pillar. Other than that, a guy could be a good young player. He could have a promising rookie season. He could be make great scoring strides and offensive playmaking strides like RJ has. And I still wouldn't get attached to them because the Raptors are early enough in their rebuild where the only thing they should be and are sure about is Scottie Barnes. And after that, I think everyone is available for the right price, and I would put IQ and RJ in that mix. And I think both also have, certain flaws in their game where I don't think you're looking at either guy being like, we absolutely need to have this guy part of our program if we're going to contend in the next few years. I just don't think that's the case.
An example of not getting attached to these players is the Thunder. OKC in 2020, 2021, only 3 players from that roster are still on that team right now. And that was year 1 of their rebuild. Shea, Dort, Kenneth Williams. It's the only 3 guys that are still on the Thunder roster. So this is just an evaluation period. Maybe 5 of these guys will be on the team in 5 years.
Yeah, I guess Chris Boucher is our Kenrich Williams then, because that is a fun fact that Kenrich Williams is actually the longest tenured Thunder player on the roster right now.
It is fun. Like if you take everything Darko says at face value, like you can really talk yourself into this team being amazing in a couple of years.
Yes.
Like Scottie's going to be the face of the league, defensive player of the year, assistant coach of the year. RJ's going to be Manu Ginobili. Like this team's going to cook.
I mean, we should not separate I'm not saying that these guys are liars because that's way too strong. But part of their job, and a large part of their job, especially when speaking directly to camera, directly to fans, is to sell. They are selling you a product. So that when that's Masai, whether that's Bobby, whether that's Darko, even the players, they are selling you a product. You just know that it's a commercial you're watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just a quick point on the RJ like coming off the bench thing, which it doesn't like if he's starting and maybe he's the first guy coming out after like 5 minutes and then he's coming back in as like sort of the bench point guard. I think that's fine. That could work. I do think, if you're thinking about Scottie, Ingram, RJ, and Pirtle all out there together, that could get tough from a spacing perspective, but not necessarily unworkable, especially if Ingram does some of the stuff that we've been talking about him hopefully doing. But if you did want to sort of nudge RJ in that direction, I wonder if the incentive would be an extension where it's like,
yes,
we want to keep you around and we'll give you like, I don't know, 120%, like that type of incremental raise on what you're currly making. Where
so that'd be like about 30 a year basically.
Yeah, it's like 30, 32 a year, something like that, where it's like you're not likely to get that type of a deal on the open market.
Right.
So I wonder if that is indeed the vision, if that's what they hope to get to, I wonder if that's the incentive they could use in order to get him to buy into that type of role.
See, my only thing with that is on a personal level, right? Like, because I think it's pretty important to consider things from RJ's perspective, not just like the top-down and management perspective. If you're RJ Barrett and you see that you've led the team in scoring this season, you've done the things that the team wants you to do this year, which is play and improve off ball. His catch and shoot threes are better. He is, continues to score really well off cuts. He doesn't dominate the ball anymore. He's had to change roles many different times, whether that's playing point guard or playing, small forward. It just depends on sort of like whatever role he's in. But, like he's played different roles for you. Again, he leads the team in scoring. When it comes time to All-Star, there was no push whatsoever, internally from the team to sort of vocalize that RJ Barrett exists on our team and he's playing well. And then at the end of the season, when you go to talk extension, they're like, actually, we want you to come off the bench, but maybe take the money. You know what I mean? Like on a personal level, it would. I feel like it would actually require like a really healthy compartmentalization of the ego to accept that from his perspective.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's fine to get tough with him in negotiations. I mean, like, I don't think they should be married to him or IQ in a way where it's like, if they do, say, envision the role we all, I think, agree is best for him long term and for the team, where he's like a super sub as a sixth man, if he wouldn't be willing to accept that, or if he has some, unreasonable contract demands to go with that, then I think you find another path, and whether it's a trade, whether it's moving on from him at some point. That kind of gets back to my answer to the original question, where I don't think you have to be so tethered to these guys where you're just like, succumbing to their demands. If you think RJ Barrett is best as your sixth man, that's what you tell him he's going to do. And if he doesn't want to do that, well, then you find a trade, and that is the best for your team.
But also, Will, I mean, to your earlier point, when we talk about messaging, like, part of the job for these guys is selling stuff, right? So, sell that to him. Like, hey, look, man, you're going to feel a lot more of the ball if you're coming off the bench and playing with some reserves than if you're trying to fit in alongside Scottie and Ingram and IQ. Like, this is your opportunity to actually, like, be a lead creator for us with these transitional lineups, and we think this could be great for you. I think the relationship would have to be strong enough and the trust would have to be strong enough that they could sell that to him, but that is part of the job.
Well, that will be... What about IQ then? We've talked a lot about RJ. What about IQ?
Listen, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago that was essentially like, the Raptors still need what Emmanuel Quickley can bring to the table. And it's that I think a lot of people forgot the reasons that the Raptors, acquired him and then immediately extended him in the summer to be the ideal partner for Scottie Barnes. And they forgot about that because he's been out of the lineup so much this season. He hasn't played that well when he's been in the lineup, which I don't think you can really fault him for too much based on how little time he's had on the court this year. But like the shooting, the volume shooting, the movement shooting, the general kind of guard skills. I'm not saying he's the purest point guard, but on this team, probably the closest thing they have to it. I think all of those things, which he has still flashed this year, are the reasons he could be an ideal partner for Scottie Barnes. And so while I think RJ has unquestionably been the better player this year and has brought the Raptors more value since they've both been Raptors, you could argue he probably is on the better deal now in terms of surplus value. I also still think if you get down to the bare bones of it, and again, consider that they are early in a rebuild and should be thinking about the long-term fit, the big picture, and how and who fits best around Scottie Barnes, I still come back to IQ as being that more ideal fit and a guy that probably makes more sense long-term if you take all the other noise out of it. But again, having said that, I'll also reiterate for the third time that I don't think they should be absolutely tethered to either one of these guys.
Keeks, what do you think of IQ's long-term fit?
I agree with again, don't be attached to any of these players. Fun fact, Quickley leads the team in pull-up threes this year, ranked 36.
Wait, it's not
He's
Scottie?
only played 27 games.
That's incredible.
Which I think...
Damn.
Sorry, 36 made pull-up threes leads the team?
Yes.
That's gotta be by far the lowest team leader in pull-up. Like, by far. That is absolutely
that might be what Jordan
insane.
Poole does in a week, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's... Yeah, like that right there really tells you about the particular deficiencies on this roster and the particular deficiencies that Quickley was brought in to address.
Yeah, I think with how little games he's played, like this has been definitely just an evaluation period with him and Scottie. Since the All-Star break, 82% of IQ's minutes have been with Scottie. Like Darko's been very intentional about making sure he matches their minutes and that they get time together. It hasn't looked incredible yet. It was rough to start. It's gotten better. I think they're playing off each other a little bit better. I got to see a little bit more, but he does, like I said, the pull-up free shooting alone, and he addresses those needs that they have not had for a long time.
I think it's it's a good on paper fit because of the injuries and just how inconsistent the lineups have been the last 2 seasons. And now because of tanking, which is intentionally taking players out of the lineup, which is actually reducing the amount of reps you can have on the court in the game. It hasn't moved beyond a theoretical good fit. It's a on paper good fit. You think about it, it's like it makes sense. But at the same time, like you need people to actually be willing to sort of like take up those roles. I think it reminds me, it's like a super diet version of Dame and Giannis. You're like, okay, when they traded for Dame, it was like, wow, Milwaukee probably gonna win the East. Who's gonna stop that Dame Giannis pick and roll? Guess what? Giannis don't want to be a pick and roll man. Giannis is like, hey, I didn't look at the back of my jersey and I didn't think it said Capella on it, so I'm not gonna do that. It doesn't say Dwight Howard on it. I'm not gonna do that. By the way, Dwight Howard, James Harden, similar situation. They were like, wow, Houston just got Dwight Howard. Amazing pick and roll combination. Dwight Howard's like, nah, man, I want to post up. So this is why I guess I'm bringing this up because it's like, even to the Scottie question before, where we kind of all concluded like, yeah, okay, maybe being the number 1 isn't the best option for him right now. Maybe being number 2, being a play finisher, roller, and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know if Scottie wants to do that, man. If you look at his bio, it says point guard. What point guards roll into the basket?
Yeah, what's his cleaning the glass position designation though?
Look, this is the NBA in 2025 when the best players do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Like I'm just going to pull a name out, but like if you watch the way that Jason Tatum operates within the Celtics offense,
sure,
he's setting screens all over the damn place. And it is so beneficial for the Celtics offense as a whole and even for Tatum himself, because it ultimately a lot of times creates easier scoring opportunities for him later in the possession. Teams have to switch. He winds up with a mismatch that he can post and like score on in isolation. Or because his guy doesn't want to leave him when he's setting a ball screen, the guy he's setting it for just winds up having a lane to the basket. I think, and Scottie is a selfless player. Everybody goes out of their way to say what a selfless star he is. So let's see that, right? And I think a big thing, first of all, you mentioned Dame and Giannis. That was like really rocky in terms of their 2-man game for the first few months. And it is so much better now. And I'm not saying IQ and Scottie is going to get to that point, but I do think they need more time and more reps. Like last year, it was super disappointing. They had like negative synergy. I frankly thought it was a little on the nose, the fact that Scottie's season ended because he got kicked in the hand going up for a rebound by IQ. Like that was just a perfect encapsulation of how they could never get out of each other's way and get on the same page. And I think there's been some progress made in that direction. But, for one thing, to me, Scottie has to become a better screener. If they're going to run that 2-man game with him setting ball screens or off-ball screens for IQ, he needs to be better at doing that. He just hasn't really shown, I guess, the willingness, the intent, the physicality to set good screens consistently. I want to see more inverted stuff with them too, though, right? Like IQ kind of screening or ghosting and flaring out. I feel like they haven't mined that for all that they could, even in the early part of this partnership. But I do think there's potential there. I think for me, if we're talking about, like, are you sold on these guys? Am I sold on IQ as a long-term fit here? The area where the shine has come off a bit is, I think the hope with him coming in, them getting him and then extending him or re-signing him for the deal that they re-signed him to, was like he was going to be able to build out more of that point guard skill set so that you could have, like, all the stuff we're talking about with Scottie, where you get him off of the ball, in space, playing off of other advantage creators, getting to be a play finisher. That would only happen if Quickley became that type of dynamic on-ball creator, and I just haven't seen that from him. Like, his on-ball stuff, apart from the pull-up shooting, which is obviously great, but in terms of being able to, like, get into the teeth of the defense, like beat guys off of the bounce, in spite of how quick he is, I just don't think he has a good enough handle or enough of that wiggle to be that type of on-ball creator. And then it's like, even if he is getting into the teeth of the defense, he's like a reluctant finisher. Like, he doesn't often want to go up for layups when there's size around the rim. He hasn't been good at finishing. His floater hasn't really been there. Like, he's just been a flat-out bad 2-point scorer ever since the trade. So that's the stuff where I'm like, yeah, the movement shooting, the stuff that he can do as an off guard, I think is great and going to be really necessary for this team. I've been a little bit disappointed by his sort of stagnant process as an on-ball guard.
I think a lot of that has to do with whether or not he feels confident in the floater. Because as a guard who's not like super athletic, as a guard who's not super strong, you're going to need to be able to finish the floater. Like, it's just an absolute, I look at almost like if Mike Conley didn't have a floater, then that he wouldn't be that good. Right? So it's like he's got to have the touch with the floater, and obviously he uses his initial burst to get past his man, but I think the quicker you go, I think the harder it is to hit the floater. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're playing with so much momentum that you have to compensate it by shooting really soft. Ultimately, like, of late, when he's been hitting the floater, like, it totally makes sense. But I feel like you need the pull-up shooting with the floater as the counter. It's almost like looking at a pitcher that has, like, a fastball and a changeup kind of thing. And if the changeup doesn't work, then the whole pitching idea doesn't work for that player. But at the same time, though, like, I think the part where we haven't really talked about as much on this panel so far is just defensively. That's probably my biggest concern. Is just like no matter what the starting lineup is, it doesn't look particularly strong defensively.
Well, especially if Emmanuel Quickly and Grady Dick are your starting guards. Like, that's just,
You can't start the three of RJ, IQ, and Grady together. It's just not.
yeah.
It's not feasible.
Let's jump to that then, because who is that shooting guard of the future? Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, Jacoby Walter are the three young shooting guards on the team. Jacoby's a rookie, Grady's a sophomore, Ochai is, I believe, in his third or fourth year. Is it third year? Might be
Ochai's
third year.
third year,
Yeah, so there you go. So who is that young shooting guard of the future, if you guys had to look into your crystal ball right now, who's doing that for us?
If there is a god, it's Dylan Harper.
Oh, so it's none of these guys. Wow, okay.
I'll say that. If there's a
Yeah,
god,
or VJ Edgecombe,
Wow.
that works too.
give me one.
Why
But
do
no,
I have all three of these guys then? What are we doing?
listen, between
What?
Dick, Ochai, Agbaji, and Jacoby Walter, again, I'm not, I think multiple of these guys could have roles in the Raptors' future. I don't think any of these three are good enough or even have a high enough ceiling for the Raptors to be sold on them. I think if you're talking about who's flashed the most potential so far, it's obviously Grady. He's also been a Raptor for the longest time out of the three. I think Jacoby's shown me a lot as a rookie. He's probably been better as a rookie than I would have envisioned, especially given that he missed the time early. I didn't think he'd hit the ground running as much as he did. So there's potential there. And then look, I think in terms of like who the steadiest of the three is Ochai. I love Ochai Agbaji as a potential, just like solid, high IQ, 3-and-D guy going forward. And you need guys like that. And I almost feel like he's the safest bet to be a part of the core in a sense, because you know what you're getting and you also don't have to have the highest expectations there. But if you're talking about ceiling, I think it's got to be one of Grady or Jacoby, and I'd lean Grady right now. But yeah, the defensive concerns with Grady are very concerning, whereas I think Jacoby's got a higher defensive ceiling. There's a lot of questions with all three, but again, not to sound too negative here, but I just don't think any of these three is like definitely the answer. I don't think any of these three are close to being the definitive answer there. And I think if we're all being honest, the definitive answer would hopefully come from this draft class and the Raptors getting some lottery luck.
Yeah. But if we are picking between these three, I think I would go with Jacoby.
I would go with
Just because I think the defense is already so much better. And yeah, if we're talking about building this thing out, where if IQ is part of the future and Brandon Ingram's part of the future, like RJ is part of the future, I mean, this team is going to need some defensive sandpaper. And I don't think Grady Dick is providing that. And I've been impressed with what I've seen defensively from Jacoby as a rookie. And I think in terms of what he can do offensively, I think there's still some hope that he can build that out. The shooting hasn't really been there this season, but I think we've seen in flashes what he can do kind of creating for himself in that mid-range area. Like that skill that we talked about that's totally lacking for the Raptors. Like get to that mid-range pull-up. Like have a little bit of that side-to-side wiggle with the ball in your hands. I think we've seen enough of that to dream on what he could look like offensively while being a very solid defensive guard. So I would bet on that. As much as like Grady's shown more in terms of maybe like offensive upside. I think definitely he's shown more in terms of offensive.
Man. Take me back to November,
so
man.
far.
Grady Dick was cooking in November.
Yeah,
October, November,
and
he was really
man,
cooking.
I don't want to be too down on Grady because he's still so young. In his second year in the league, was looking really good early in the season before he just absolutely hit a wall. I love the fact, even though he's been terrible at finishing there this season, I just love the fact that he is determined to get to the rim at all costs.
Yep.
And like I think you'd probably feel a little bit more confident in what he could do as a movement shooter than Jacoby, but yeah, I'm betting I think on the defensive upside there in terms of like if I'm just like looking at this Raptors team and what the team build is going to look like at least for the next few years.
I'm going to agree with Wolfond completely here. For me, it's Jacoby in terms of like highest ceiling. Both with his age, his defense, the offense will come. I think it looks good. The shot looks good. Grady's defense has been not great to watch. I don't want to be mean, so I'm not going to say anything else about him. But
I don't think you could start Grady Dick if you're intending to go for the playoffs right now.
I don't think you can start Grady Dick. Exactly.
You especially can't start him in a backcourt with Emmanuel quickly. Like,
no,
that's just a defensive
and with
disaster.
RJ on the wing, you can't. The reason why that people talk about the net rating of our starting five, or even just like the four, Yak, Quick, Scottie, and RJ, a lot of those minutes come with Grady on the floor with them. One, you can't use any of the numbers from this season, I don't think, without a grain of salt. Yeah. Grady is just not going to fit long term, I don't think, unless he comes off the bench or plays in different units. Ochai, I think, has been if Yak is the steadiest Raptor this year, Ochai's been the second steadiest.
Yeah.
The stabilizer, the second most stabilizing force is what I call Yak.
To me, he is like a future glue guy
100%.
to the T. Like Ochai Agbaji is going to be the glue guy on good teams at some point in his career, and I kind of hope it's in Toronto. Again, that's not me saying I think he's going to be the starting shooting guard here. I think he can be a really good reserve and a glue guy for good teams in Toronto, and I hope that's the case.
Yeah, I think objectively Grady has shown us the highest flashes offensively. To remind people, from the start of the season to January 1st, Grady Dick was averaging 17.8 points per game. Like he set like multiple career highs for himself. A lot of that was within the offense, but a lot of that was like he's creating within the offense. You know what I mean? Like he's not being spoon fed. One of my issues with Ochai is he's being spoon fed everything, right? Which is fine. Like obviously, like that's just going to be how basketball is going to be played. But also at the same time, it's like, you know, you are going to look more efficient if you are going to be only asked to finish corner threes. If you're only going to, like, in transition, you know, cutting to the basket, right? So it's hard to sort of compare his efficiency with a guy like Grady's. The issue with Grady is defensively, unless that improves to at least an average level, it's just hard to see him starting, despite the fact that he can be such an explosive scorer for you, which, again, I really like that idea of him coming off the bench. Jacoby's the one where I feel really good about him both offensively and defensively. I like the defensive pressure he's able to extend. That really fits with the style of the team. And then offensively, yes, he can catch and shoot for you, but also he has that ability to attack a closeout. He, of the three, has the best pump fake. Grady Dick's got a decent pump fake. He kind of pump fakes at the three-point line and he rips it and goes to the basket, or he goes in that, you know, two-dribble mid-range pull-up. Jacoby is in the mid-range. It looks like he's stuck up fake, and then he like draws fouls that like even very skilled players struggle to sort of adapt and make those reads. So I like Jacoby the most. But of course, again, like you mentioned, a lot of this is contingent on the draft. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing with IQ and RJ. It's like if they draft somebody at their positions, then all of a sudden it makes it totally difficult to sort of anticipate their long-term fits if they're going to be blocking, you know, Ace Bailey from being in the starting lineup, or Dylan Harper or Cooper Flagg from being in the starting lineup. Again, right now those odds are fading, but you know, it is what it is.
None of IQ or RJ or Grady or Ochai or Jacoby would block any of those three players from being in the starting lineup.
Yeah, there you go.
The other thing with Ochai is like so much of his value is contingent on what he was doing as a three-point shooter this year being real and sustainable. He was at like 34% for his career coming into this year, and he's at 40% this year. And like, this is a dude who like he's going to attack in a straight line, right? Like
for sure. Yeah, he's got no wiggle to the game.
So if he's not garnering closeouts, then I think that's going to take away a lot of what he's been able to do as sort of, the inside the arc scorer, closeout attacker who's able to get to the basket, while attacking off of the catch, things like that. So, I'm hopeful that 3-point shot is real. I think that was like a selling point on him coming into the league, as a late lottery pick, and the form on it looks really nice. I think it's like pretty textbook. So I feel like you'd hope that what he's shown as a shooter this year can sustain.
Okay, last question addressing the Raptors rebuild. Appreciate you guys sticking around for the roundtable here. The last question is, how good is this team actually? Like, if you strip away the tanking, you put in Brandon Ingram, another year of development for the young players, whoever they add through the draft this year, and whatever minor end of the bench, movements. But you anticipate the team being like relatively there. Is this a playoff team? Is this a play-in team? Do they have an avenue potentially to becoming more than that? I think that's always a question you got to ask yourself. How good is this actual team?
Look, I think that, and I've said this, I think that if you bring this team into next season with another year development for Scottie, the other, young guys, the rookies taking another step, adding a healthy Brandon Ingram, just having a decent draft, I legitimately think when you look at the state of the Eastern Conference and what the Raptors have looked like at times this season, they're a playoff team, and they could be fighting for as high as like home court in the first round next year. I think there's that much potential, and the East is that bad and that in flux. Like after Cleveland, Boston, New York, who are you looking at in the East being like, the Raptors definitely can't be better than them next year if Ingram's healthy, and it's just not there. They can be that good next year. But the more important part of your question is whether there's an avenue to a title team, and just bringing this current team along, even if I think their upside is like as high as fighting for a 4 or 5 seed next year, doesn't mean I think there's an avenue to a title team. And that's where I think that question will be answered through the draft if they get lottery luck, and or through a trade if they eventually have some sort of big consolidation trade where they trade some of these young guys and contracts and future picks for that legit star that completes everything. Short of a trade like that, or short of the lottery luck hitting in the next year or two and bringing one of those guys, then no, I don't think there's an avenue to a title team as presently constructed, even though I think they could rocket up the East next year.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo all that. I think I see them as sort of like a 45-win type of team next year with reasonable health. And I mean, I know I said this to you, Will, when we were at that Raptors-Sixers joke of a game a few days ago.
Wow,
but
come on, man. Put some respect on who was it, Alex Reese? At one point, they put him in the game, and they didn't even have his number on the Jumbotron.
Yeah.
They had to manually insert the 65 on the Jumbotron for Alex Reese.
Can I just say before Wolfond continues that I think Will responding to Wolfond calling that game a joke by being like, come on, put some respect on, and then having to think about any player that played in that game is just the perfect encapsulation of the final month of this season for the Raptors, the Sixers, and like a third of the league. Sorry,
yeah.
Wolfond.
When the highlight of a game is the introductions from Strizzy, then I think we've gone down a dark path. But look, I just said to you, I'm even if they're like a totally mediocre, like 40 and 42 win team next year, I'm just really looking forward to like watching games that feel like they matter at least a little bit, where the team is actually invested in trying to win them. There's some sense of stakes, and there's no cognitive dissonance where like you can just watch the team and hope they perform well and win the game rather than feeling in the back of your mind that it's better for them to lose. I'm just looking forward to that. And I think, again, like maybe there's an avenue for them to climb a little bit higher than that, but looking at them, I think, 45 wins feels about right to me. And then, to Cash's point about the second part of the question, like a path to a championship, I do think so much is banking on those lottery ping pong balls, and that really is the avenue. Like, you never want to say never, because if you were looking at like the 2013 Raptors roster, I don't think you'd be like, oh yeah, there's a path to a championship here. But lo and behold, so it's like, can Scottie Barnes grow into a Kyle Lowry level of player, leader, culture setter, and the young guys sort of grow with him and establish, a baseline of, 50 plus wins to the point where at a certain point they feel like they're ready to make that sort of all-in swing that puts them over the top. I mean, it's maybe far-fetched, but not, I guess, entirely out of the question. But I really do think that, they need to get a really, really good player in this draft. I think that's going to be imperative.
Before I answer the question about the team, I want to give you an idea of where the East is right now. So there are only 6 teams in the East that have a winning record. 6. Since that mid-January stretch when the Raptors started playing defense a little bit better, they're 16-14. That's the 7th best record in the East since then. Since that mid-January point, only 7 teams in the East have a winning record.
Yeah.
And that's with them actively trying to lose.
The Raptors are actively trying to lose games, and they are 7th in the East since mid-January.
Yeah,
Crazy.
I mean, all I see on the timeline is that's that little catchy Pistons jingle where they're like, the Pistons won again. And I'm like, again? The Pistons?
But
Another game
that was
where they
my
won?
point too, right? It's again, Detroit's in the running
Like,
for
the Pistons are
4
good,
seed this
but
year.
they're not that good.
Right.
They're cool. They're
That's what I'm
tough.
saying.
They play defense or physical. I get all
They're
that.
very
But
physical.
yeah, they're physical. They'll fight you like every other game. I get it. But the Pistons won again? I'm like, I don't know, man.
Man.
There are going to be 2 teams in the East playoffs this year that won't have a winning record. Just
Yeah.
think about that for a second. But with everything, I think how good this team is obviously depends on the lottery balls, but it also how Darko has run the team this year gives me a good idea of what they'll look like next year in terms of their offense and their defense. The offensive system has been pretty similar to what he was running last year. Obviously, they're not scoring a lot of points, but I think they've been generating a lot of good looks, which is a positive through movement and cutting and what's that stat I had? I think I had that. So 9.2% of the Raptors' scoring possessions are off cuts, and this tracking is only straight off of points scored off cuts, not general off-ball movement. That's the 3rd highest rate in the league. Cleaning the Glass has a stat called location effective field goal percentage, which kind of gives you an idea of what a team's shot profile would look like if they shot league average in all those locations compared to their frequency. They're 4th in the NBA in location effective field goal percentage.
That means we're 27th in making good shots.
They are not very good at making shots. They're 19th. And
Yeah,
they're
fair.
29th in 3-point attempts and 29th in free throw percentage. So
Yeah.
the system, the offensive system they're working towards and that they're building towards and that they're developing players around has a lot of potential, I think. The defense has been a lot of fun to watch as of late.
It's been great.
Obviously, it doesn't mean as much, I think, with Colin Castleton, I think, playing 30 minutes a game and Orlando Robinson being up there. But the fact that it's kind of carried through with those guys is still a positive, and I think that'll continue through.
Yeah, I guess my last question with this is just do you think they're going to be a top 10 team on offense first or a top 10 team on defense first? Because I feel like if you're going to be a playoff team, you have to at least be one of those on either end. Playoff, top 6, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. No? All right, you got to come on, man. What, you just going to be
I think they're
Maybe
I'm
the
gonna
East
say
is
I'm
so
gonna
bad,
say
but
I'm gonna say offense
okay.
more likely than
Yeah,
defense.
I think I'm leaning towards offense too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know, man. The way Scottie's looked, if you have Scottie and Yak all year, again, even Bi, not that he's ever been a consistent defender, but he's had his moments and the length is there. The backcourt's obviously worrisome, but I feel like it's a cop-out, but again, so much is dependent on how the lottery balls bounce and what happens. Because it's we've talked about, I think all 4 of us at certain points off camera, but if you plugged Dylan Harper in next year, I think the way he completes the puzzle and fits so perfectly, then I'd say the offense.
The offense.
It has a clear path to top 10 potential immediately. But it's if you get more of a project and you're relying more on the talent you already have right now, then I'd probably say the defense is their clearer path to a top 10 based on what it's looked like the last couple months.
Yeah. I mean, I think most teams who are young that make the jump from being lottery team to being a playoff team, they usually jump through defense, like what the Pistons are doing right now, or what Orlando did last year. Indiana is probably the exception. They jump through offense, but I don't know. I don't see no Tyrese Halliburton on the Raptors roster, man. Yeah, so.
I'm also, like another thing that I'm looking forward to seeing next season is kind of seeing whether this crop of young players can do their own version of like the bench mob. And I don't think there's like a Pascal or a Fred or even a Yak necessarily in that group.
Oh, what are we talking about? That Norman DeLon Wright?
There you go. I mean, I think just in terms of having a bench that's basically entirely made up of rookie scale guys, and also I think having their identity kind of built around defense. Like I feel like this, you could look at it and it could be the type of team where the starters are bringing you the offensive punch, and then those bench guys are coming in just like in 2017-18 and just defending their asses off. You know what? Like between Shed and Jacoby and Mobo, I think it could be the type of bench unit that is like obviously not a ton of offensive punch there, but getting a lot of stops and like creating offense off of runouts and things like that, and just be like a really entertaining group to watch. I don't know if they're quite ready for that yet, like for that to be the entire bench, just all of these rookie scale guys. But I think that's one thing I'm looking forward to next year that I think is going to be pretty fun to watch.
I mean, one of Ochai, or also maybe two of Ochai and RJ might be moving to the bench too. So.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't look. We shouldn't
way,
rule out the possibility that
I think RJ's going to start next year, guys. I think he's going to start.
Even if they do draft Dylan Harper, like I think it's entirely possible that he, like, I don't know that he's necessarily going to start right off the bat. Like he could be coming off the bench as well. Even the most highly touted prospects, the most successful college players, often struggle badly when they first enter the league and need some time and some seasoning to get their legs under them. So I wouldn't like expect him to come in and be starting right away and like raising this team's offensive ceiling right off the bat.
I genuinely think Dylan Harper can do that. I think he's that good.
Fair enough. Obviously, it goes without saying that Cooper would start for us if we do get the first overall pick.
Cooper would also change a lot of things in terms of the way. I mean, that's probably an hour and a half episode for another day if they were to land Cooper Flag, but I think that changes a lot of things in terms of team construction and all of a sudden who you're building things around. But again, that's a very long conversation for another day, I suppose, if Will wants to have that on his show.
Hey man, listen, if we win the number 1 overall pick in the lottery, we might have to do a 24-hour live stream, man. This guy, it might kind of be like a telethon situation. Like, so look, we've taken up enough of your time. I appreciate all of you. Keeks, where can people find you and your work?
On, I guess, Twitter and a Substack. I've been doing little newsletters on the NBA twice a week.
What's your Substack called?
thatkeeks.substack.com.
There you go. Wolfond, where are we going to find you and your work, buddy?
The Score app, the Score website, if anybody still uses that. But I think mostly people are using that on mobile. So I write features over there covering the entire league. I actually I don't think I've written about the Raptors once this year because Cash has basically taken over as something akin to a Raptors beat writer. So he has that market cornered, and I'm covering mostly the rest of the league. But all my stuff is there. I don't tweet too often anymore either, but you can follow me on Twitter, Joey_W, if you're inclined. That's me.
Get on that blue sky, Wolfond.
I'll get on it, but I'm going to pronounce it Blueski because when I first saw it, that's what I thought it was. Like, and I've just gone with that ever since. So if you see me on Blueski...
I didn't know Wolfond was a Northern Ontario hockey player. Hey, Blueski.
The most complimentary thing I can say about Wolfond, and I mean this entirely complimentary, you are the Jeff Van Gundy of the Raptors media space. Cash.
I don't know how to feel about that, but
it's complimentary. Jeff Van Gundy, complimentary. Cash, what you saying these days?
People can find a lot of Raptors coverage, kind of like a once a week Raps feature, and sometimes general NBA on the Score app. And then you can find more of my general NBA takes analysis on the Score's YouTube page. Every Tuesday, host the studio show, the Unfiltered Show, which all of you have been on. And I believe Keeks and Wolfond will be on next week. And then every Friday, the regular Unfiltered series. That's more just like me in front of a green screen ranting about something each week. So Score app, Score YouTube page. Check them out.
There you go. Yeah, maybe catch me and Alex on a future episode too. You know, we roll through the studio quite a bit. I mean, look, listen, it's roughly the same 10 people that kind of circle through these type of circuits, but we appreciate all of you. Thanks to everyone for listening. This has been the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway, and we'll catch you actually later tonight when the Raptors play the Golden State Warriors. Are we all going to stay up late for that one, guys?
10 p.m., guys.
10 p.m. start,
I'm ready for
12:30
this
finish.
Quentin Post Colin Castleton matchup, baby.
Buddy,
Guys,
where is Quentin
stay up.
Post? Was Quentin Post part of your all nobodies team?
No, because he was a 2024 draft pick, so he didn't qualify.
Yeah, he's
Or else he
been.
would have been.
He's the quickest that has gone from like. I remember in February, me and Jerome were in an Airbnb. We're like, let's just turn on the TV. And we're watching the Warriors game, and I'm like, who is this? Like, what is going on here? Like, he's Dutch? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was so confusing. And now when I watch the Warriors, I'm like, holy shit, Quentin Post is great. He's spacing the floor. He's in the corners. He plays smart. He's feisty. I'm like, he's the quickest that's gone from like, who is this guy to like, wow, he's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
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 The notes
All right.
I have on him are like. So
You have
okay.
Quentin. Oh, yeah, I guess you did do the notes for
do.
tonight's game. Yeah.
I did, yeah.
Do you have a Quentin Post fun fact before we leave?
Yes. He's made 52 threes since he entered the rotation on January 20th.
Wow.
52. That's the most by a 7-footer in that span by a lot.
Wow.
That's honestly, to find a 7-footer who shoots threes at a high level, especially as a guy who you drafted. Was he a second round pick?
Yeah.
Yeah, 52nd pick.
52nd pick. 3 more picks later, and it was Bronny, right? So like, that is an incredible find by the Golden State Warriors, and
And he's
great
fourth
stat.
on the
50,
team in
50
threes.
second picks the last 2 drafts have turned out some gems, eh? Too many Kamara the year before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, too many men. All right, buddy. Thanks everyone for listening. We're not going to do a whole Quentin pod and Tamari and Kamara podcast, but those are, if you're playing fantasy, those are the people to pick up these days. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you later tonight after the Warriors game.